Sometimes the loneliest hearts are the ones that have learned to survive without hope. For years, one woman believed she'd spend the rest of her days alone in the frozen mountains, and she'd made peace with that. Then one winter morning, she found a dying stranger in the snow, surrounded by wolves. She saved his life that day, dragging him back to her cabin through the storm. What she didn't know was that he was running from his own broken past, just like her. As the long winter kept them trapped together, two people who thought love was behind them started to feel something they'd forgotten was possible. But when spring came, he had to choose, go back to his old life or stay with the woman who saved him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin stood at 7,200 feet. Tucked into a fold of the Bitterroot Range, where Montana's mountains met the sky in jagged peaks that seemed to scrape heaven itself. Miriam Hayes had called this place home for 16 years, and in all that time, she'd never once questioned whether she belonged here. The question she'd stopped asking was whether she belonged anywhere else. The door to her cabin bore the marks of her father's hands, intricate carvings of elk and pine. Mountain lions and bears, each one etched with the patience of a man who understood that good work took time. He'd spent 2 winters on that door alone, working by firelight after long days of building the cabin itself. Miriam ran her fingers over the carvings each morning before stepping outside, a ritual that kept him close even though he'd been gone 15 years now. This particular November morning arrived cold and clear. The kind of crystalline dawn that made every breath visible and turned the forest into something sacred. Miriam stood on her porch at first light, coffee steaming in her chipped ceramic mug, and surveyed the world she'd built. The woodshed stood full to bursting with split logs, enough to see her through till March if she was careful. The smokehouse held venison and elk from her fall hunt, along with smoked trout from the creek that ran silver and cold through the property. Root vegetables filled the cellar, potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips. She'd canned berries and made preserves through the summer, lining her shelves with mason jars that glowed like amber in the lamplight. She was ready for winter. She was always ready. Kodiak emerged from the dog run, shaking frost from his thick grey coat. He was her lead dog, 9 years old and steady as stone, with pale blue eyes that seemed to understand more than most people she'd known. Behind him came the others, Denali, Chinook, Sitka, and the 2 younger ones, Yukon and Tiger, 6 dogs in all, northern breeds built for this country, and the closest thing to family she had left. "Morning, old man," she said, and Kodiak pressed his massive head against her thigh in greeting. The others milled around her legs, tails wagging, breath clouding the air. She'd feed them after her own breakfast, the same routine she'd followed for years. Routines mattered up here. They kept you sane when the snow piled high and the silence pressed in from all sides. Inside, the cabin was small but efficient, a single main room with her bed in one corner, a kitchen area with a wood-burning stove, a table and 2 chairs her father had built, and the stone fireplace that dominated the north wall. A ladder led to a sleeping loft she never used, and a door opened to a small back room where she kept her tools, traps, and hunting gear. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. She fried 2 eggs and ate them with toast and black coffee, standing at the window that looked out over the valley. The view never failed to move her. Endless ranks of evergreens marching down the mountainside, the silver thread of the creek, and beyond it all, the far peaks already wearing their winter white. Some people might find it lonely. Miriam found it honest. The mountain didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. After breakfast, she dressed for the day in layers, thermal underwear, wool pants, a flannel shirt, a heavy sweater her mother had knitted decades ago. She pulled on her boots, worn soft with age, but still solid, and shrugged into her canvas coat. The Winchester rifle came off its pegs above the door. She checked it automatically, though she'd cleaned it just 2 days before. In this country, your rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. The dogs knew the routine. They fell into formation as she hitched them to the sled, Kodiak at the lead position where he belonged. She'd checked the trap line today, a circuit that would take most of the morning. Marten and fox mostly, though last week she'd found a lynx in one of the sets. Beautiful creature. She'd reset the trap and let it go. Some things were too magnificent to kill just for money. The sled runners hissed over the snow as they headed into the forest, the dogs finding their rhythm, their breath coming in steady clouds. Miriam stood on the back runners, one hand on the handlebar, and let her mind go quiet. This was meditation for her. The whisper of the sled, the creak of the harnesses, the vast silence of the mountains broken only by wind through the pines. She'd come to this life by necessity as much as choice. Her marriage had ended badly when she was 32, a brief union to a man from Missoula who'd loved the idea of her more than the reality. He'd wanted a wife who'd wear dresses and host dinner parties, who'd give up the mountains and the wild places for a house in town and a normal life. She tried, God knew she tried, but after 2 years she'd felt like she was suffocating. The divorce was quick and bitter. He'd called her cold. She'd called him blind. She'd come back to the cabin after that, moving in with her parents, who'd been quietly relieved to have her home. For 3 years, they'd lived together on the mountain, and those had been good years. Her father teaching her the skills he'd learned from his own father, her mother showing her the old recipes and remedies. The three of them existing in the kind of peaceful harmony that doesn't need many words. Then one winter night, when Miriam was 35, her parents had driven down to Pine Ridge for supplies. A logging truck had lost control on black ice. The impact killed them both instantly. Miriam had buried them in the small cemetery in town, then returned to the cabin and stayed. That was 16 years ago now. She'd been alone ever since, and she'd made her peace with it. Or told herself she had. The trap line yielded 2 marten and a fox, good pelts that would fetch decent money when she made her monthly trip to Pine Ridge. She reset the traps, marked her mental map, and turned the team back toward home. The sun was high now, the temperature creeping up to maybe 20 degrees. Warm, relatively speaking. Back at the cabin, she fed the dogs and skinned the catch, working with practiced efficiency at the wooden table outside. Her hands were strong and sure with the knife, the years having taught her exactly how to separate pelt from flesh without waste. She'd flesh the hides properly later, scrape them clean, and stretch them on frames to dry. It was work that required patience and care, but she'd learned long ago that patience was one thing the mountain gave you in abundance. That afternoon, she split wood for an hour, adding to the already substantial pile. The rhythm of the axe was satisfying. Lift, swing, split, stack. Her muscles remembered the motion, her body falling into the work without thought. At 52, she was as strong as she'd been at 30, lean and weathered and capable. The mountain kept you young in some ways, old in others. Evening came early this time of year. By 4 o'clock, the light was already fading, turning the snow blue and the shadows long. Miriam brought the dogs inside. They'd sleep in the main room tonight, curled around the fireplace like they always did when the temperature dropped. She made herself a simple dinner of stew from the pot she kept going on the stove, adding to it each day, and ate while watching the fire. After dinner, she allowed herself what had become a nightly ritual. Though she'd never quite admitted it was one, she pulled out the old photo albums from the trunk under her bed and sat in her rocking chair by the fire, turning pages slowly. Her parents' wedding photo, her father holding up a string of trout, her mother in the garden she'd kept behind the cabin, and there Miriam herself at 25 before the marriage, standing on this very porch with a backpack and a rifle and a smile that looked like it belonged to someone else entirely. She closed the album and set it aside. The dogs were already asleep, Kodiak's head resting on Sitka's flank. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. The weather report on her battery-powered radio had called for a major system moving in, possibly the first big storm of the season. Miriam banked the fire, checked that everything was secure, and climbed into bed with her clothes still on. You learned to sleep ready when you lived alone in the mountains. She lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind build, and talk quietly to the dogs even though they couldn't hear her. Big storm coming, boys. We'll stay close tomorrow, let it blow itself out. Kodiak's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. Miriam pulled the quilts up to her chin, quilts her mother had stitched by hand, each one a small masterpiece of patience and love. The cabin creaked around her, settling into the cold, and somewhere far off a coyote howled. She thought, as she often did before sleep, about the shape her life had taken. The solitude, the silence, the small satisfactions of work done well and seasons survived. It wasn't the life she'd imagined as a girl, but it was honest work and honest living. And there was dignity in that. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly know as she drifted towards sleep, was that tomorrow morning she'd make a choice that would change everything. That 16 years of solitude were about to end in the most unexpected way. That survival sometimes meant opening the door you'd thought you'd locked forever, outside. The storm gathered itself in the darkness, and in a forest 6 miles distant, a man she'd never met stumbled through the snow, lost and freezing, with wolves closing in behind him. Their paths were converging in ways neither could predict, drawn together by chance and choice, and the simple fact that sometimes, in the vast wilderness, the loneliest souls find each other against all odds. Miriam slept and dreamed of nothing, and the storm came down like a hammer on the mountain. The next morning would change everything. The storm had blown through in the night, leaving behind 2 feet of fresh powder and a world transformed into something pristine and silent. Miriam woke before dawn, as she always did, to the sound of absolute quiet, that particular stillness that comes after heavy snow, when even the wind holds its breath. She fed the fire first, then herself, then the dogs. By the time full light arrived, she was already considering her options. The new snow would make travel difficult, but the dogs needed exercise, and she needed to check on things. Not the trap line, that could wait a day, but the immediate area around the cabin. Sometimes heavy snow brought down widowmakers, dead branches that could kill you if they fell wrong. Sometimes it revealed animal signs worth knowing about. "Short run today," she told Kodiak as she harnessed the team. "Just a patrol loop, get our legs under us." The dogs were eager, having been cooped up through the storm. They lunged into the traces as soon as Miriam released the brake, and the sled shot forward into the fresh powder with that distinctive hiss she'd come to love. The world was almost painfully bright, the new snow reflecting the morning sun until everything seemed to glow from within. They followed the creek drainage down the mountain for half a mile, then cut east through a stand of lodgepole pine. The dogs were working hard, breaking trail through the deep powder, and Miriam let them find their rhythm. Kodiak was magnificent at the lead, reading the terrain ahead, finding the line of least resistance. That's when she saw it, a splash of red against the white. "Whoa," she called, and the team stopped immediately, trained to voice commands. Miriam set the snowhook and moved forward, her hand instinctively checking for the rifle on the sled. Blood, fresh blood, and a lot of it, already starting to freeze in the cold air. She found the trail easily enough. Someone or something had come through here recently, stumbling and falling, leaving a path of disturbed snow and crimson drops. The tracks were human, bootprints widely spaced and erratic, the marks of someone staggering. Miriam's heart rate picked up. She'd lived alone long enough to be cautious, but she'd also been raised to help when help was needed. Someone was hurt out here badly, and in this cold that meant they didn't have much time. She followed the blood trail on foot, the Winchester in her hands now, the dogs whining behind her. The tracks led through the trees and into a small clearing, and that's where she found him. The man was face down in the snow, one arm stretched out ahead of him as if he'd been crawling. His coat was torn, his pants shredded at the legs. Blood soaked the snow around him, and standing not 20 feet away, watching with the patience of predators who knew their prey was finished, were 3 wolves. They were winter lean and hungry, their grey coats almost invisible against the snow. The largest one, the alpha, locked eyes with Miriam the moment she stepped into the clearing. She could see the calculation in its gaze. Was this new human a threat or just another opportunity? Miriam brought the rifle up smoothly, chambering around. The sound carried sharp and clear in the cold air. The wolves' ears swiveled toward her, but they didn't retreat. They were too hungry or too committed. "Get!" Miriam said, her voice level and hard. When they didn't move, she fired a shot into the snow near the alpha's feet. The crack of the rifle shattered the morning silence, echoing off the trees. The wolves scattered instantly, breaking in 3 directions and vanishing into the forest with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. Miriam moved quickly to the man, keeping the rifle ready in case the wolves returned. Up close, she could see he was in bad shape. Deep gashes on his legs, claw marks from wolves that had been harrying him. His face was grey with cold and blood loss. His breathing was shallow and rapid. She knelt beside him, setting the rifle within reach. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. She pulled off her glove and checked his neck for a pulse. Still there, but thready and weak. His skin was ice cold. Hypothermia, blood loss, possibly internal injuries. She needed to get him warm and get those wounds closed, and she needed to do it fast. The problem was moving him. He was a big man, easily 6 feet and probably 190 before he'd lost blood. Dead weight through deep snow, back to the sled. She looked back at the dogs. They were 50 feet away, watching intently. Kodiak was on his feet, hackles raised, scanning the tree line for the wolves. Miriam made a quick decision. She ran back to the sled and grabbed the emergency gear she always carried, a tarp, rope, and the small medical kit. Back at the man's side, she rolled him onto the tarp, trying to be gentle but knowing speed mattered more than comfort right now. She wrapped him quickly, then secured the rope around him and the tarp both, creating a makeshift drag sled. The trip back was brutal. She dragged him by the rope, digging her boots into the snow for purchase, pulling with her whole body. Progress came in feet, not yards. The dogs wanted to help but couldn't without their sled, so they paced alongside. Kodiak staying between Miriam and the forest, where the wolves might be waiting. It took 20 minutes to cover the distance that should have taken 5. By the time she reached the sled, Miriam was breathing hard, her shoulders burning with effort. She secured the rope to the back of the sled and let the dogs help with the rest, pulling the man on the tarp behind them as they made for the cabin. At the cabin, she unhitched the dogs and got them secured, then dragged the man inside. The fire was still going, the cabin warm. She unwrapped him on the floor near the hearth and really looked at what she was dealing with. The leg wounds were the worst. 4 deep gashes on his right thigh, 3 on his left calf. Teeth marks and claw marks both. The wolves had been working him for a while. His coat was torn at the shoulder, and when she peeled it back she found more scratches, though these were superficial. His hands were scraped raw, probably from falling. Miriam worked fast. She heated water on the stove, pulled out her medical supplies, needle, thread, antiseptic, bandages. She'd sewn up her share of wounds over the years, both animal and her own. She cleaned the leg wounds first, flushing them with warm water and antiseptic until she was sure they were clear of debris. Then she started stitching. The work was meticulous and took over an hour. The man never woke, which was probably a mercy. Each wound got cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. When she was done with the major injuries, she checked him over for other damage. His hands and feet showed signs of frostbite, but not severe. She found a lump on the back of his head, probably from a fall. Possible concussion. She stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped him in warm blankets, propping him near the fire. Then she forced warm broth between his lips, a few drops at a time, trying to get his core temperature up. His breathing was better now, deeper and more regular, but he was still unconscious. While he slept, she went through his pack, looking for identification. She found a wallet with a driver's license, Everett Kane, age 58, address in Seattle. She found a water bottle, nearly empty, a few energy bars, a map that was torn and water-damaged. And there, at the bottom of the pack, she found something that made her pause, a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with sketches and notes. She knew she shouldn't look, but she opened it anyway. The sketches were buildings, detailed architectural drawings with notes about materials and measurements and design principles. Beautiful work, precise and thoughtful. The handwriting was careful, almost meditative, and scattered through the drawings were occasional notes that were more personal, somewhere quiet. Start over. Leave it all behind. Miriam closed the journal and set it aside. Everett Kane, an architect from Seattle by the looks of it, who'd come to the mountains for reasons she could only guess at. And he'd nearly died for it. She checked his pulse again, stronger now. His color was coming back, the gray fading to something closer to normal. The bandages on his legs showed no signs of fresh bleeding. She'd done what she could. Now it was up to his body to decide if it was enough. For 3 hours she sat beside him, feeding the fire, checking his vital signs, trying to coax more broth into him. The dogs lay in a semicircle around them both, as if standing guard. Kodiak's eyes never left the man's face. As the afternoon light began to fade, Everett finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, brown eyes, confused and unfocused. He looked at the ceiling, then at Miriam, then down at himself wrapped in blankets on a stranger's floor. Where am I? His voice was barely a whisper, rough with disuse and cold. My cabin, Miriam said. In the Bitterroot Range. You were in bad shape when I found you. He tried to sit up, winced and fell back. The wolves? Gone! I scared them off. He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing this. When he opened them again, there was something else there, understanding of how close he'd come. You saved my life. Maybe, Miriam said. Too early to tell. You've got some healing to do first. He looked at her properly then, taking in her weathered face, her direct gaze, the competence in her hands. Thank you, he said, and meant it. You're welcome. Now rest. We'll talk more when you're stronger. But even as she said it, Miriam felt something shift in the cabin, a presence where there'd been absence, a voice where there'd been only her own. She'd spent 16 years alone on this mountain, and in the space of a single morning, that solitude had ended. She didn't know yet if that was a gift or a burden. She only knew that the man lying on her floor, this stranger named Everett Kane, had brought something into her life that she'd thought was gone forever, the weight of another human being, the responsibility of care, the simple fact of not being alone. Outside, the temperature was dropping as evening approached. The storm might have passed, but winter was just beginning. And now there were 2 of them to see it through. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm of vigilance and waiting. Everett drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully awake but never completely gone either. Miriam maintained her watch, checking his temperature, changing his bandages, forcing broth and water into him whenever he was coherent enough to swallow. She'd moved him to her own bed on the 2nd day. Recognizing that the floor wasn't doing him any favors, she took the rocking chair, sleeping in snatches when exhaustion won out over concern. The dogs rotated shifts beside the bed, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Kodiak spent the most time there, his massive head resting on the quilt, watching the stranger with those pale blue eyes. During the delirium, and there was plenty of it, Everett talked. Not full sentences, just fragments that bubbled up from wherever his fever mind had gone. He called out for someone named Anna, his voice breaking on the name. He muttered about foundations and load-bearing walls, his hands making small gestures in the air as if he were drawing plans. Once he said clearly, I can't go back there. I can't. Miriam listened to all of it, filing the information away without judgment. Everyone had ghosts. She had her own. On the 3rd day, she gave herself permission to examine his belongings more thoroughly. Not prying, she told herself, just trying to understand who she was caring for. The wallet yielded the basics: driver's license, credit cards, $63 in cash. There was a photo tucked behind the license. Everett and a woman, both younger, both laughing at something off camera. The woman had kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. Anna, probably. The journal was harder to resist. Miriam sat at her table with it, turning pages slowly. The architectural drawings were beautiful, public buildings mostly. A library with soaring windows, a community center with elegant lines, a school that seemed designed to welcome children. Each one was annotated with notes about natural light, about flow, about creating spaces where people could gather and feel safe. But as she paged deeper into the journal, the drawings changed. They became smaller, more tentative. The notes turned personal. 2 years since Anna died. Still can't sleep in our room. Sold the practice today. Jim thinks I'm crazy. Heading east or north. Anywhere that isn't here. The most recent entry was dated 3 weeks ago. Lost the trail yesterday. Turned back but couldn't find markers. Low on food. Should have been more careful. Anna would have been furious with me for being so unprepared. Maybe that's the point. Miriam closed the journal carefully. So, a widower running from grief, poorly equipped for wilderness travel, who'd gotten himself lost and nearly killed. She understood the impulse, even if she couldn't condone the execution. When her parents died, she'd wanted to run too. The difference was she'd run to the mountain, not into it. That evening, Everett woke properly for the first time. Not the confused half-consciousness of before, but actual awareness. His eyes focused on Miriam where she sat by the fire, and recognition flickered there. This was the woman who'd been caring for him, the voice he'd been hearing through the fog. "How long?" he asked, his voice still rough but stronger. 3 days since I found you. 4 since you got hurt, probably. He processed this, looking around the cabin properly. Small but well-kept, functional, the work of someone who knew how to live alone. "I'm in your bed, for now. You needed it more than me." "I'm sorry for the trouble," Miriam shrugged. "Wasn't going to leave you to the wolves." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, I suppose not." He tried to sit up, managed it with effort. The blankets fell away, and he looked down at himself. Clean clothes that weren't his, bandages on his legs. "You did all this? Wasn't anyone else around to do it?" He met her eyes then, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of debt, yes, but also of something else. Recognition, maybe. The look of one solitary person seeing another. "My name's Everett. Everett Kane. I know. I found your wallet. I'm Miriam Hayes. This is my place. How far from civilization?" "Depends on your definition." "Pine Ridge is about 15 miles down the mountain. My nearest neighbor is 6 miles east, but I only see them a few times a year." Everett absorbed this. "So I'm stuck here. For a while, yes. Those leg wounds need time to heal, and you're not strong enough to travel. Weather's turned cold, too. Another storm's supposed to come through tomorrow." He nodded slowly, the reality settling on him. Stuck in a stranger's cabin, dependent on her care, unable to even stand on his own. If the situation bothered him, he kept it to himself. "I'll try not to be too much trouble." "You've already been plenty of trouble," Miriam said, but there was no heat in it. "Might as well see it through properly." Over the next few days, Everett's strength returned gradually. By day 5, he could sit up without wincing. By day 6, he could stand with help. By day 7, he could make it to the table for meals, though the effort left him shaking. Miriam adjusted to his presence, the way she'd adjust to any change in routine, with patience and careful observation. She learned his rhythms. He was quiet in the mornings, almost meditative. He slept poorly at night, often waking from dreams that left him staring at the ceiling. He was meticulously clean, apologizing every time he needed help with basic tasks. And he was deeply, painfully grateful in a way that suggested he wasn't used to accepting help. On the 8th day, while Everett was sleeping, Miriam noticed something on his left hand that she'd somehow missed before. A gold wedding band, worn smooth with years of wearing. Still there, not hidden away or removed, but present. A choice. That night, after a simple dinner of venison stew, Everett spoke more than he had since waking. "You've read my journal." It wasn't a question. Miriam met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I was trying to understand who I'd pulled out of the woods. And what did you learn? That you're an architect from Seattle. That you lost your wife. That you came out here looking for something or running from something, maybe both." Everett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Anna. Her name was Anna. We were married for 25 years. She died 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. So am I." He turned the wedding band on his finger absently. "I couldn't stay in Seattle after she was gone. Everything there was us. The house we'd built, the practice we'd grown together, the friends we'd shared. Without her, it all felt like a museum to a life that didn't exist anymore. So you left. 2 years ago, yes. Sold everything, put the money in the bank, and just started moving. Thought maybe if I kept moving, I'd outrun the grief. He laughed without humor. Turns out that doesn't work. Miriam poured him more coffee. What made you come to the mountains? I wanted to feel something, anything. I'd been numb for so long. I thought maybe if I pushed myself, got into real wilderness, faced something challenging, maybe I'd feel alive again. Or at least feel something. He gestured at his bandaged legs. I definitely felt something. Getting yourself killed isn't the same as feeling alive. I know that now. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Miriam said, "You asked her permission." Everett looked up sharply. "In your journal, you wrote, Anna would be furious with me for being unprepared. You're still talking to her, still asking what she'd think." His jaw tightened. "Is that wrong?" "No, just something I recognize." Miriam stood and moved to the small trunk under her bed. She pulled out a photo album and brought it to the table. "My parents built this cabin, lived here 40 years. I grew up spending summers here, moved here full-time after my divorce. When I was 35, they were killed in a car accident." She opened the album to a photo of a couple in their 60s, standing on the cabin porch. "That's them. John and Margaret Hayes. He was a carpenter. She was a nurse. They taught me everything I know about living up here." Everett studied the photo. "You look like your mother." "So I've been told." Miriam closed the album. "Point is, I still talk to them too. Still ask what they'd think about things. My father's been gone 15 years, but I touch his carvings on that door every single morning. Understanding passed between them, the kind that comes when two people recognize the same wound in each other. We're both running from ghosts," Everett said quietly. "Or running with them. Haven't quite figured out which." Later that night, after Everett had gone to sleep in the bed and Miriam had settled into the rocking chair, she lay awake thinking about the stranger in her cabin. 4 days ago, he'd been an unconscious burden, a problem to solve. Now he was becoming a person, complex and damaged, and trying to find his way through grief just like her. She didn't know yet what that meant, having another person here. She only knew that something had shifted in the cabin. The silence wasn't quite as deep. The solitude wasn't quite as complete. And when she finally drifted to sleep, she realized she hadn't felt lonely in days. By the second week, Everett was strong enough to move around the cabin without help, though he still tired easily. The leg wounds were healing well. Miriam's stitching had held, and there were no signs of infection. He'd gotten lucky, and he knew it. The awkwardness of sharing close quarters began to ease as they established unspoken boundaries. Miriam went about her routines, tending the dogs, checking traps when weather allowed, maintaining the cabin. Everett tried to make himself useful in small ways, keeping the fire going, washing dishes, folding blankets. He was careful not to intrude, to take up as little space as possible in a home that wasn't his. But the cabin was only so big, and proximity has a way of breaking down walls. One evening, Everett noticed Miriam pulling a battered tin box from a shelf. She set it on the table with the kind of reverence usually reserved for something precious. Inside were recipe cards, dozens of them, handwritten in a careful, old-fashioned script. "My mother's," Miriam said, seeing his interest. "She kept every recipe she ever used. Some of these go back to her grandmother, handed down through the women in our family." Everett moved closer, careful not to touch, but wanting to see. The cards were yellowed with age, spotted with flour and grease and the marks of decades of use. Sourdough bread, Mother Hayes's recipe, venison stew for winter, wild huckleberry preserves. Do you still use them? Some, the bread recipe, definitely, the stew. Others are for dishes I don't make anymore because they're meant for more than one person. She paused, then added, or because they remind me too much of when she was here to make them herself. "I understand that," Everett said quietly. "After Anna died, I couldn't eat half the things we used to cook together. Too many memories in every bite." Miriam looked at him then, really looked, and saw something she recognized, the particular loneliness of eating alone when you're used to sharing meals. "Are you hungry?" "Always lately. I think my body's trying to heal." "Then let's make something proper." She pulled out a card. "Pot roast with root vegetables. Takes a few hours, but we've got nothing but time." They worked together in the small kitchen, Miriam directing and Everett following instructions. He chopped vegetables while she seasoned the meat. She taught him how to layer everything in the Dutch oven just so, how to judge the temperature of the coals, how to be patient and let the food cook slow. "You're a good teacher," he said, watching her work. "Had good teachers myself." She adjusted the pot on the stove. "My father taught me to hunt and trap. My mother taught me to cook and preserve. Between them, they made sure I could survive up here alone. Did they know you'd end up alone?" The question caught her off guard. She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't think they planned for it. But after my marriage ended and I came back, my mother said something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Some people are meant to live loud lives in crowded places, and some are meant to live quiet lives in wild ones. Neither is better, just different. You have to know which one you are.' And you knew? Eventually. Took me a few tries to figure it out." She covered the pot. "Now we wait. It'll be ready in about 3 hours." They spent the waiting time in companionable silence, Everett reading an old paperback he'd found on a shelf, while Miriam worked on stretching and treating a marten pelt. The dogs dozed by the fire. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin was warm and filled with the slowly building aroma of pot roast. When the meal was finally ready, they ate at the table together, the first real dinner they'd shared since Everett had regained his strength. The food was simple but perfectly done, the meat falling apart at the touch of a fork, the vegetables sweet and tender. "This is incredible," Everett said. "I haven't had a meal this good in years." "Food tastes better when you make it with someone else," Miriam said, then seemed surprised she'd said it out loud. After dinner, as they cleaned up together, Everett noticed the carved door again, the one Miriam touched every morning. He moved closer to examine the details. Elk with massive antlers, a mountain lion mid-leap, a family of bears, each one carved with such precision you could see individual strands of fur. "Your father made this. Spent 2 winters on it. He'd work by firelight after supper, just a little bit each night. My mother would read to him while he carved. It was their ritual. He was an artist. He would have laughed at that. He'd say he was just a man with a knife and time on his hands." She ran her fingers over an elk. "But yes, he was an artist. Do you carve?" "Some, not like he did. I can make basic tools, fix broken things. But I never had his gift for it." Everett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Would you mind if I tried? I found some of his tools in the back room. My hands have been itching to make something." Miriam studied him. Letting someone use her father's tools felt significant, like crossing a line she'd drawn years ago. But there was something in Everett's face, a hunger not for food, but for creation, for the act of making something with his hands. "All right," she said finally, "but treat them with respect." "I will. I promise." That night, after Miriam had gone to bed, Everett sat by the fire with a small piece of pine and one of the carving knives. His hands remembered the feel of creating, even if it had been years since he'd made anything that wasn't a drawing. He started with something simple, a wolf curled in on itself, sleeping or resting. The work was meditative. Each cut of the knife focused his attention, quieted the constant noise in his head. For the first time since Anna died, he felt something like peace. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. They'd wake at dawn, share coffee and breakfast. Miriam would tend to her daily work while Everett carved by the fire, his hands growing surer with each passing hour. They'd have lunch together, simple but satisfying. Afternoons meant more work. Everett was strong enough now to help split wood, and he took to it with surprising skill. Evenings were for cooking and conversation. The conversations deepened gradually, the way they do when 2 people have nowhere else to be and no reason to rush. Everett told her about growing up in Portland, about studying architecture in college, about meeting Anna at a lecture on sustainable building design. She'd been a landscape architect, and they'd fallen for each other over shared dreams of creating spaces that honored both human needs and natural beauty. Miriam told him about her brief, painful marriage, about the man who'd wanted to change her into someone softer, more conventional, about realizing that being true to yourself sometimes meant being alone. "Do you regret it?" Everett asked one night. Choosing this life? Miriam was quiet for a long time. I regret the divorce. Not because I wanted to stay married, but because I picked wrong in the first place. I knew who I was, but I thought maybe I could be someone else for him. That was the mistake, thinking love meant changing yourself instead of being yourself. Anna and I never had that problem, Everett said. We fit together from the start. Same values, same dreams, same vision for the future. When she got sick, it wasn't just losing her. It was losing the life we'd built, the future we'd planned. Everything we were going to do together, travel, retirement, growing old. All of it gone in 18 months. Is that why you still wear the ring? Everett looked down at his hand, at the gold band he'd worn for so long. It felt like part of his finger. I don't know how to take it off. Every time I think about it, it feels like erasing her. Like saying what we had didn't matter. Keeping it doesn't mean it mattered more, Miriam said gently. It just means you're not ready to let go yet. There's no shame in that. That conversation marked a shift between them. The caregiving dynamic had faded, replaced by something more equal. They were no longer stranger and rescuer, patient and nurse. They were two people sharing space, sharing stories, learning each other's rhythms. One morning, Miriam woke to find Everett already up, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. She joined him, bringing her own mug. It's beautiful here, he said. I can see why you stayed. It's not for everyone. No, but for the right person, it's everything. He glanced at her. How long has it been since you had someone to share it with? 16 years, give or take. That's a long time to be alone. I got used to it. She sipped her coffee. Or thought I did. Everett understood what she wasn't saying, that his presence had disrupted her carefully constructed solitude, reminded her of what it felt like to have companionship. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. Later that day, when Miriam came in from checking on the dogs, she found Everett standing at the window, turning something over in his hands. The small wooden wolf he'd been carving. It was finished now, and it was beautiful, every line clean, every detail perfect. The wolf was curled in sleep, peaceful and protected. It's for you, he said, to thank you for saving my life. Miriam took the carving carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood. This is fine work, Everett. I wanted to make something worthy of your father's tools. She set the wolf on the mantel next to a photo of her parents. It looked right there, like it belonged. Like maybe Everett was starting to belong too. That realization should have frightened her. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly, it felt like something thawing after a long, cold winter. Tentative and fragile, and alive with possibility. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue, and Everett's recovery was nearly complete. The leg wounds had healed to pink scars, the bruises had faded, and his strength had returned fully. He moved around the cabin and the property with confidence now, no longer the helpless stranger Miriam had dragged from the snow. The change in their dynamic was subtle, but unmistakable. They'd fallen into patterns that felt less like host and guest, and more like partners sharing a life. Mornings began with both of them up at dawn, working together to feed the fire, make breakfast, tend the dogs. Everett had proven himself capable with the animals. Kodiak, in particular, had warmed to him, following him around the property with the devotion he'd previously reserved only for Miriam. He likes you, Miriam observed one morning. Watching Kodiak press his massive head against Everett's leg, the feelings mutual. They never had dogs growing up. Anna was allergic. He scratched behind Kodiak's ears. I didn't know what I was missing. They'd established a routine for the daily work too. Everett took over the wood splitting entirely, freeing up Miriam's time for other tasks. He was methodical about it, approaching the work like he approached everything, with careful attention to detail and a desire to do it right. His architect's mind appreciated the geometry of the split, the way force and angle combined to cleave wood along its grain. Miriam taught him winter survival skills with surprising patience. She showed him how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to tell fresh signs from old, how to move quietly through the forest, to be part of the landscape rather than an intruder in it. How to judge distance and direction without a compass, using the sun and the trees and the shape of the land itself. "You're a good student," she said one afternoon, after he'd correctly identified a set of lynx tracks. "I'm motivated. Don't want to end up lost and circled by wolves again." That's a pretty good motivator. One evening, Everett asked if he could try his hand at another carving. Miriam brought out her father's tools without hesitation this time, and he set to work on a new piece, something more ambitious than the wolf. He started with a block of cedar, working slowly, letting the wood tell him what it wanted to become. She watched him work for a while, noting the way his hands moved with confidence now, the way he'd tilt his head and study the piece from different angles before making a cut. "You've done this before," she said. "Not exactly. But architecture is about seeing what could be, then bringing it into being. This isn't so different, just a different medium, a different scale. What are you making?" "Not sure yet. I'll know when I see it." Over the following days, the carving began to take shape. A bear, standing upright, one paw raised as if in greeting or warning. The detail was extraordinary. Individual claws, the texture of fur, the intelligence in the eyes. Miriam had never seen work like this, not even from her father. "Everett, this is remarkable." He stepped back, studying his work critically. "It's close. Not quite there yet, but close. You have a gift. Maybe, or maybe I just needed to find something worth making again." He looked at her. "Being here, it's awakened something in me. Something I thought died with Anna." The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Miriam felt something shift in her chest, pleasure at his words, but also fear. He was healing here. That was good. But healing meant he'd eventually be strong enough to leave. They took walks together now, short excursions through the forest with the dogs. Everett marveled at things Miriam had stopped seeing after years of familiarity. The way ice formed in crystalline patterns on pine needles, the perfect geometry of snowflakes, the way light filtered through the trees at certain times of day. "You see things I miss," she admitted one afternoon. "I've been looking at this forest so long, I stopped really seeing it." "Fresh eyes," he said. "Everything here is new to me, extraordinary. It's just trees and snow. No, it's light and shadow and the way weather shapes the land over time. It's the sound of wind through branches and the silence after snow. It's beautiful, Miriam, really beautiful." She looked at him, saw the genuine wonder in his face, and realized he was giving her back something she'd lost, the ability to see her own home as special rather than simply familiar. December arrived quietly, bringing shorter days and longer nights. One evening, Everett asked about her monthly trips to town. Miriam explained how she'd go down to Pine Ridge once a month for supplies, to sell pelts, to check her post office box. It was the only regular human contact she had beyond this cabin. "Do you enjoy it?" She laughed without humor. "No, I dread it, to be honest. I never quite fit in down there. Vernon at the general store is kind, but most folks see me as the strange mountain woman who lives alone. They're polite, but there's always distance. I know that feeling. After Anna died, I felt like an outsider everywhere I went. Couples would see me and get uncomfortable, like grief was contagious. Single people didn't know what to do with a widower. I belonged nowhere. Is that why you kept moving?" "Partly. If I didn't stay anywhere long enough to put down roots, I didn't have to face how displaced I felt." He turned the wedding band on his finger, a gesture Miriam had noticed he did when thinking about his wife. "I've been drifting for 2 years, and I still haven't found anywhere that feels like home. What does home feel like to you?" The question seemed to surprise him. He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore. With Anna, home was wherever we were together. Our house in Seattle was beautiful, but it was the life we built inside it that mattered. Without her, I don't know what home means." Miriam understood that more than she could say. The cabin was her home, but it was the memories of her parents, the routines they'd established, the life they'd taught her to live. That's what made it home. The structure was just wood and stone. They decided to mark the season by decorating the cabin modestly for Christmas. Not anything elaborate. Neither of them were sentimental in that way, but a few small touches to acknowledge the turning of the year. They gathered pine boughs and made simple wreaths. Everett carved small wooden ornaments, a deer, a bird, a star. Miriam strung them on thread and hung them near the window. Working together on the decorations became unexpectedly intimate. Their hands would brush as they passed materials back and forth. They'd stand close, heads bent over their work, comfortable in the shared space. The dogs watched from their spots by the fire, tails thumping occasionally against the floor. One night, a heavy snow trapped them inside for 3 straight days. The storm was fierce, wind howling around the cabin, snow piling against the walls. They played cards by firelight, rummy and poker and games Miriam's parents had taught her. They shared stories they hadn't told before. They laughed, genuinely and often, at small absurdities and shared observations. During one of those long evenings, Miriam realized she hadn't laughed like this in years, maybe decades. The sound of her own laughter surprised her, rusty from disuse, but warm and real. Everett noticed. "You have a good laugh." She felt herself flush. "Don't use it much. You should. It suits you." Later that night, after they'd both settled into their sleeping spots, Everett in the bed, Miriam in the chair, she lay awake thinking about the easy companionship they'd developed, about how natural it felt to have him here, about how empty the cabin would feel when he left, because he would leave eventually. Spring would come, the trails would clear, and he'd return to wherever people like him belonged. And she'd go back to her solitude, except now she'd know what she was missing. The thought should have made her retreat, should have made her pull back and protect herself. Instead, she found herself hoping spring would come late this year. Found herself wanting more time, more evenings by the fire, more walks through the snow, more moments of this unexpected companionship. She was in dangerous territory, and she knew it. But for the first time in 16 years, danger felt like it might be worth the risk. December deepened, bringing with it the particular quality of light that only comes in the heart of winter, crisp and clear and almost painfully bright against the snow. They'd been living together for 5 weeks now, and the cabin had absorbed Everett's presence the way wood absorbs oil, until it was hard to remember what the space had felt like before him. One morning, Miriam asked if he wanted to come check the trap line with her. It was a full day's work, requiring stamina and skill, and she'd been hesitant to bring him along before. But he'd proven himself capable in so many ways that it seemed natural to include him now. "I'd like that," he said. "If you think I'm ready." Only one way to find out. They set out at dawn, the dogs pulling the sled through fresh powder. Everett rode on the runners behind Miriam, close enough that she could feel his warmth at her back. She talked him through the route as they went, pointing out landmarks, explaining how she'd set up the line to maximize efficiency while minimizing unnecessary suffering for the animals. "I don't take anything I won't use," she said, "and I make it as quick and clean as possible. My father taught me that. Respect for the animal means respecting its death too." At each trap, she showed him how to approach carefully, how to assess what they'd caught, how to dispatch and reset quickly. He watched with the same focused attention he brought to everything, asking questions when they were relevant, staying quiet when silence was better. They found 2 marten and a fox, good pelts that would bring fair money at the trading post. Everett helped with the work without flinching, his hands steady even when the task was unpleasant. By the time they headed back to the cabin, Miriam had revised her opinion of him yet again. He wasn't just adapting to mountain life, he was embracing it. That evening, she told him so. "You did good work today. Most people from the city would have struggled with what we did." "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed. "You're not." They fell into a comfortable silence, working together to prepare dinner. The rhythms of their collaboration were so natural now, they barely needed words. He'd reach for the salt just as she needed it. She'd hand him the knife before he asked. It was the kind of wordless coordination that usually took years to develop. After dinner, Everett pulled something from his pack. An old compass, brass and scratched, the kind that came from another era. "Found this in my gear. It's broken. The needle spins without settling. Lost its magnetization, probably. Happens sometimes. I was thinking I might try to fix it." He turned it over in his hands. "Seems like it should be possible." "Remagnetize the needle, clean the mechanism, make it useful again." Miriam understood the metaphor without him spelling it out. A man who'd lost his direction, trying to fix a compass. "I've got some tools that might help." They worked on it together over the next few evenings. Everett's careful hands disassembling the compass, cleaning each tiny component, replacing the worn parts with improvised solutions. Miriam watched him work, noting the way his face relaxed into focus, the way the task seemed to quiet whatever restlessness usually drove him. When the compass was finally reassembled and working, Everett held it up to the light, watching the needle swing true and settle, pointing north. "There? Fixed? Good work." He set the compass on the table between them, and for a moment they both just looked at it. Then Everett said quietly, "I've been lost a long time, Miriam. Since Anna died, maybe before. Definitely after. I didn't know where I was going or why, just kept moving, because stopping meant facing everything I'd lost. And now I'm starting to think maybe being lost was the point. Maybe I had to lose my way completely before I could find a new one." The conversation hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Miriam felt her heart beating harder in her chest. "What are you saying?" But before he could answer, the dogs erupted into barking outside, sharp and urgent. Both of them moved immediately to the window. In the gathering dusk, they could see shapes moving at the edge of the tree line, wolves, 3 of them, circling closer to the dog run than they should. Miriam grabbed the rifle and was out the door in seconds, Everett right behind her. She fired a warning shot into the air, the crack echoing across the valley. The wolves scattered but didn't flee entirely, staying just within the tree line, visible as darker shadows against the snow. "They're getting bold," she said. "That's not good. Same pack that found me. Maybe. Or they've learned there's easy food here with the dogs." She fired another shot, closer this time. The wolves finally melted back into the forest. "I'll need to keep closer watch for a while." Back inside, the moment from before was broken. But something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to name. They went about their evening routine with exaggerated normalcy, both acutely aware of the other in the small space. That night, Miriam lay in her rocking chair, unable to sleep. She could hear Everett's breathing from the bed, steady and deep, and knew he was awake too. The cabin felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. The next morning brought news from the outside world. Vernon arrived on his monthly supply run, his snowmobile loaded with goods and mail. He was in his 70s, a widower himself, and one of the few people Miriam truly trusted. "Brought your usual," he said, unloading boxes. "Plus mail. Quite a stack this time." Miriam sorted through it while Vernon visited with Everett, the 2 men finding common ground in their shared experience of loss. Most of it was junk, catalogues and advertisements, but there was one official-looking envelope that made her stomach drop. County letterhead, the kind that never brought good news. She waited until Vernon left before opening it. When she did, the world seemed to tilt sideways. Notice of foreclosure. Past due property taxes. Total amount owed, $40,000. Payment due in 90 days, or the property would be seized and sold at auction. Miriam read it 3 times, hoping she'd misunderstood. But the numbers didn't change. $40,000. She didn't have it. She'd been managing on inheritance money and the small income from selling pelts. But 2 years ago, she'd had a medical emergency, a bad fall that required a helicopter evacuation and surgery. Her savings had been wiped out paying those bills. She'd been falling behind on the taxes ever since. Telling herself she'd catch up eventually. Eventually had arrived. She sat at the table, the letter in her hands, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under her. This cabin, this land, it was everything. Her parents' legacy, her home, her entire life. The thought of losing it was like being told she had 90 days to live. Everett emerged from the back room, where he'd been working on something, and immediately saw her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, Miriam." She looked up at him, saw the genuine concern there, and felt something break inside her. "I'm going to lose the cabin." The whole story came out then. The medical bills, the depleted savings, the back taxes she couldn't pay. Everett listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, he said, "Let me help." "No, Miriam," I said no. She stood up, needing distance. "I don't take charity. It's not charity. You saved my life. Let me return the favor. That's different. That was emergency medicine, not money. Money I have. I sold my practice, sold my house in Seattle. It's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. Let me use it for something meaningful." The offer should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like another kind of loss. Her independence, her self-sufficiency, the pride that had kept her going all these years. "I won't be indebted to you." It wouldn't be debt. It would be, he struggled for the right word, partnership. Investment in something worth saving. "You barely know me. I know enough." He stepped closer. "I know you're stubborn and proud and capable. I know you've built a life here that matters. I know you pulled me out of the snow and put me back together when you could have left me to die. That has to count for something. It counts for gratitude, not $40,000. Miriam." He waited until she looked at him. "I'm falling in love with you." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread out and out. Miriam felt her chest tighten, panic rising. "Don't. Too late." "I already am." His voice was gentle but firm. "And I think you feel something too, even if you won't admit it." "Everyone I love leaves or dies," she said, the words ripping out of her. "My parents, my marriage, everyone. I can't do this, Everett. I can't let you in just to watch you go. What makes you think I'm going anywhere?" "Because spring will come, and you'll remember you have a whole life waiting somewhere else. You'll realize this was just an interlude, a place to heal, not a place to stay. And I'll be left here alone again, except now I'll know what I'm missing." She was shaking now, years of controlled emotion breaking through. "I'd rather stay alone than risk that." Everett stood there, looking at her with such tenderness it hurt. Then he crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for half a second before surrendering, pressing her face against his chest and finally letting herself cry, for her parents, for her failed marriage. For 16 years of loneliness she'd pretended was strength. He held her while she shook, murmuring quiet reassurances, his hand steady on her back. When the storm passed and she pulled away embarrassed, he kept one hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure out the money," he said. "And we'll figure out us, but right now just let me help. Please." Miriam wiped her eyes, pulled herself together with visible effort. "I need to think. Take all the time you need." "I'm not going anywhere." But that was the problem, wasn't it? One day he would go somewhere, and Miriam would be left with both a saved cabin and a broken heart. She didn't know which loss would hurt more. The week that followed Everett's confession was tense and careful, both of them moving around the cabin like people walking on ice they weren't sure would hold. Miriam threw herself into work, checking traps, splitting wood, anything that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Everett gave her space, but his presence was constant, a reminder of everything she wanted and everything she feared. They were civil, even kind, but the easy companionship they'd built had fractured. Every conversation felt weighted, every glance charged with meaning. The cabin that had felt warm and full now felt cramped and uncomfortable. On the 7th day, Miriam made a decision. She'd go into town, talk to the county assessor, see if there were payment plans or extensions available. Maybe she could sell more pelts, take on some work, find a way to handle this herself without accepting Everett's money or his feelings. She told him her plan over breakfast. He nodded but didn't offer to come along. They both knew she needed to do this alone. The trip down the mountain took 3 hours on the sled, the dogs working hard through deep snow. Pine Ridge appeared gradually through the trees. A small collection of buildings clustered around a single main street, population maybe 300 in winter, twice that in summer. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and newcomers were noticed immediately. Miriam tied up the dogs outside Vernon's general store and went inside. The old man looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Miriam, wasn't expecting you for another 2 weeks. Business in town. Thought I'd stock up while I'm here. Vernon's eyes were sharp despite his age. He saw more than most people gave him credit for. Everything all right up there? That fellow still with you? Everett, yes, he's healed up mostly. Seems like a good man, from what I saw. He is. Miriam gathered supplies, keeping her face neutral. Vernon, what do you know about fighting foreclosure? The old man's expression shifted to concern. Your place? Got the notice last week. 40,000 in back taxes. 90 days to pay or they take it. Vernon was quiet for a moment, thinking. That's rough, Miriam. Your daddy would be heartbroken. I know. The county won't negotiate much. They've got a budget crisis, been going after delinquent properties hard. But there might be options. Talk to Edgar Mills at the assessor's office. He's fair, at least. Miriam nodded, paid for her supplies, and headed to the county building, a squat brick structure that housed the assessor, the clerk, and the sheriff's office. Edgar Mills was a thin man in his 60s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the tired look of someone who delivered bad news regularly. He listened to Miriam's situation with patient sympathy, then pulled out her file. I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes, the board's been pretty strict on these cases. With the amount you owe and the time it's been outstanding, I don't see them approving a payment plan. You'd need to pay in full or sell the property. That land has been in my family for 40 years. I understand, and I'm truly sorry, but the county has to follow its policies. He paused. There is one thing. If you can pay off even half, say 20,000 before the deadline, I might be able to convince the board to extend the rest. Give you another year for the balance, 20,000. Still more than she had, but at least it was something. I'll see what I can do. Outside the county building, Miriam stood in the winter sunlight and tried to think. She could sell every pelt she had, take odd jobs in town, maybe scrape together 10,000. But 20? It might as well be 1,000,000. Everett's offer echoed in her mind. He could solve this with a single check. But accepting meant admitting she needed him, and needing someone meant being vulnerable to loss. She'd spent 16 years building walls against that exact pain. The trip back up the mountain felt longer than usual. The dogs sensed her mood and worked steadily, giving her the space to think. By the time the cabin came into view, darkness was falling, and Miriam still hadn't found any answers that didn't involve accepting help she couldn't bring herself to take. Everett had dinner waiting, the venison stew she'd taught him to make. The gesture was thoughtful, but it only made everything harder. She ate in silence while he watched her with patient concern. Finally he asked, "How did it go?" "Not great. County won't negotiate much. I'd need at least 20,000 up front to buy more time. Let me—" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "I'm sorry, but no." Everett set down his fork. "Why are you so determined to do this alone?" "Because alone is what I know. Alone is safe." "Safe from what? From being happy? From having someone care about you? From being abandoned again?" She stood up, needing to move. "You don't understand what it's like, Everett. Watching everyone you love disappear. My parents died in an instant. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. My marriage fell apart because I couldn't be what he needed. I've spent 16 years learning how to not need anyone, how to be enough by myself. And then you show up, and suddenly all those walls I built feel like prison bars instead of protection. Miriam, I'm terrified," she continued, the words tumbling out now that they'd started. "Terrified that if I let you help, if I let myself care about you the way I'm starting to, you'll leave. Spring will come, and you'll realize you don't belong here, that this was just a temporary refuge while you healed. And I'll be left with a saved cabin and a destroyed heart, and I don't know if I can survive that." Everett stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "What if I don't leave?" "You will eventually. Everyone does. What if you're wrong?" His voice was gentle but firm. "What if I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be? What if finding you wasn't an accident, but the thing I've been searching for since Anna died?" Miriam wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. But fear had its hooks in deep. "How can you know that? You've been here less than 2 months. You don't know what it's really like living on this mountain year after year. The isolation, the work, the winters that feel like they'll never end. What seems romantic now might feel like a cage in a year, or it might feel like home. He squeezed her hands. I can't promise the future, Miriam. Neither can you. All we have is right now, and right now I know I want to be here. With you, helping you save this place, building something together instead of surviving alone. She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. I need time to think, then take it. But while you're thinking, remember this. You saved my life. You gave me a reason to want to live again. Let me give something back. Not as charity, not as debt, but as someone who cares about you and wants to see you happy. That night, Miriam lay awake in the rocking chair, staring at the dying fire and trying to untangle the knot in her chest. Everett's offer represented salvation, for the cabin certainly, but maybe for her too. The chance to stop being alone, to share this life with someone who understood its value. But accepting meant risk, meant opening herself to the possibility of loss all over again. The wooden wolf he'd carved sat on the mantel, catching firelight. She'd placed it there weeks ago, and now it felt like a promise of his skill, his thoughtfulness, his desire to create something beautiful for her. If he could put that much care into a carving, what else might he offer if she let him? Morning came without answers. Miriam went about her routines mechanically, feeding dogs, checking supplies, avoiding Everett's eyes. He gave her space, working on his own projects, but his presence was a constant reminder of the choice she needed to make. 3 days later, everything changed again. Vernon arrived unexpectedly, his snowmobile laboring up the trail in the afternoon. Miriam went out to meet him, concerned. He never came twice in 1 month, unless there was urgent news. Mail, he said, handing her an envelope. Looked important. Thought you should have it right away. The return address was from Seattle, a law firm she didn't recognize. Miriam's stomach clenched. She opened it, standing there in the cold, Vernon watching with concern. It was from Everett's former business partner. The letter was formal, but the message was clear. There was a major commission available, designing a new public library for the city. It was the kind of project Everett had built his reputation on. Significant money, 18 months of work, and a chance to reclaim his professional identity. The partner was requesting Everett's participation, offering generous terms. There was a phone number to call. A deadline 2 weeks out for response. Miriam read it twice, each word feeling like a nail in a coffin. This was it, the real world calling him back, offering him something she never could. Purpose, prestige, the life he'd built before grief drove him to the mountains. Everett emerged from the cabin, saw Vernon and Miriam standing in the snow. Everything all right? Miriam handed him the letter without a word. Watched his face as he read, saw the flicker of something, interest, longing, cross his features before he could hide it. A library, he said quietly. The kind of project I used to dream about. You should call them. Miriam's voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Miriam, no, really. This is important. This is your life, your work. You should at least hear what they're offering. Vernon glanced between them, reading the tension, and made a diplomatic exit. I'll leave you two to talk. Take care, Miriam. After he left, Everett tried to explain. This doesn't change anything, doesn't it? Yesterday you were telling me you wanted to stay here. Now you have an offer to go back to Seattle, to do the work you're actually trained for. To have a real life instead of playing house in a mountain cabin? This is a real life. His voice rose with frustration. What we have here is real. What we have here is temporary. This proves it. She took the letter back from him. You should go. Take the meeting, see the project. Make an informed decision instead of choosing based on some romantic notion of mountain living that won't survive a full year of isolation. You're pushing me away. I'm being realistic. You're being scared. He stepped closer. And I understand that. But running from this because you're afraid doesn't make you strong, Miriam. It just makes you alone. The words hit like a slap. She wanted to argue, to defend her walls and her choices. But deep down she knew he was right. She was scared, terrified, and she was doing what she'd always done when fear got too big, closing off, pushing away, choosing solitude over risk. Maybe alone is what I deserve, she said quietly. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Everett took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You deserve happiness. You deserve companionship. You deserve someone who sees how remarkable you are and wants to build a life with you. The question isn't whether you deserve it. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it." Miriam felt tears burning behind her eyes. "What if I'm not?" "Then I'll wait until you are." He kissed her forehead gently, then stepped back. "But I am going to Seattle. Not because I want to leave, but because you're right. I need to see that project, make a real choice with full information. I'll be gone a week, maybe 10 days. And when I come back, we'll figure out the rest, together, if you'll have me." She wanted to protest, to tell him not to go, to beg him to stay. But she couldn't form the words. Instead, she just nodded, feeling everything she'd been afraid of coming true. Him leaving, her alone again, the future uncertain. 3 days later, Vernon came to pick Everett up in his truck. Miriam helped him pack, moving through the motions with numb efficiency. At the door, Everett paused, looking back at the cabin that had become his home. "I'm coming back," he said. "You don't have to." "I'm coming back," he repeated more firmly. "Because this is where I belong. With you." Then he was gone, the truck disappearing down the mountain, and Miriam was alone again. The cabin felt enormous and empty. The dogs whined, sensing something wrong. Even Kodiak paced restlessly, looking for the man who'd become part of their pack. That night, Miriam sat at the table and finally let herself cry, for the impossibility of her situation, for the choice she'd have to make, for the love she wanted but was too afraid to claim. The wooden wolf on the mantel seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. Everett had left it behind, left her something to remember him by. But he'd also left something else on the table, a folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed until now. She opened it with shaking hands and found blueprints, not for a grand public building, but for something smaller, a modest guest cabin connected to the main house by a covered walkway. Below it, a workshop with plenty of windows for natural light. And at the bottom, in Everett's careful architectural handwriting, "If you'll have me, if you'll let me stay. Not in your space, but beside you. Building something together." Miriam pressed the paper to her chest and finally understood he hadn't just been making plans. He'd been making promises. The question was whether she was brave enough to believe them. The first 2 days after Everett left were the hardest. Miriam moved through her routines with mechanical precision, but everything felt wrong. The cabin was too quiet. The dogs were restless. Even the morning ritual of touching her father's carvings on the door felt hollow, as if the connection to the past couldn't fill the absence of the present. She tried to focus on practical matters. Sold every pelt she had at the trading post in Pine Ridge, negotiated hard, and came away with $8,000. It was something, but nowhere near enough. She inquired about temporary work in town, clearing snow, repairing fences, anything. But winter jobs were scarce, and the town had its own people to employ first. Vernon found her in the general store on the 3rd day, counting her remaining money for the 10th time as if the numbers might change. "You look like hell, Miriam." "Thanks, Vernon. Always could count on you for honesty." He sat down across from her, his old bones creaking. "That man's coming back, you know." "You don't know that. I saw the way he looked at you." "That's not a man who's leaving for good." Vernon leaned back. "Question is, what are you going to do when he does come back?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You're just scared to admit it." He stood slowly, joints protesting. "Your daddy used to say the bravest thing a person could do was let someone in. He was talking about your mother, how she'd been hurt before, how she'd built walls. But she let him in anyway, and they had 40 good years together. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't surviving alone, Miriam. Sometimes it's choosing to not be alone." After he left, Miriam sat in the quiet store and finally let herself think about what she really wanted. Not what was safe, not what protected her from hurt, but what would make her happy. The answer came quickly, probably because she'd known it all along. She wanted Everett to come back. She wanted to accept his help with the taxes. She wanted to try building something together, even if it meant risking her heart. The realization was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out a journal and started writing. Not a diary exactly, but a record of her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. She wrote about finding Everett in the snow, about watching him heal, about the way he'd brought laughter back into her life. She wrote about her terror of abandonment and her growing recognition that avoiding pain wasn't the same as being happy. The writing helped clarify things. By the time she set down the pen, she knew what she needed to do. She needed to tell Everett the truth, that she loved him, that she wanted him to stay, that she was willing to take the risk despite her fear. She needed to stop protecting herself from hurt and start opening herself to joy, but first, she needed him to come home. The days crawled by. 5 days, 6, 7. Miriam threw herself into work, preparing the cabin for whatever came next. She organized supplies, repaired small things that had been neglected, cleaned with an intensity that left her exhausted. The dogs watched her with knowing eyes, especially Kodiak, who seemed to understand she was waiting for someone. On the 8th day, Vernon arrived with mail. There was a letter from Everett, actual pen on paper, not email or text. The sight of his careful handwriting made her chest tight. Dear Miriam, Seattle is exactly as I remembered, and nothing like I remembered. The city is the same buildings, same rain, same noise. But I'm different. I've been meeting with my former partner about the library project. It's impressive work, the kind of project I would have killed for 5 years ago. Good money, prestige, a chance to leave a mark on the city, and I realized I don't want it. I spent 2 years drifting because I couldn't find anywhere that felt like home. I thought home died with Anna, that I'd spend the rest of my life as a stranger everywhere I went. But I was wrong. Home isn't a place you remember. It's a place you choose. I choose you, Miriam. I choose the cabin and the dogs and the mountain mornings. I choose the quiet and the work and the life we've been building together. I choose risking my heart on someone who might break it, because the alternative, living safe but empty, isn't living at all. I'm finishing up here, settling some final business with the practice. I'll be back in 2 days. I'm bringing money for the taxes. Don't argue. Just accept it as a gift from someone who loves you. And I'm bringing plans for that guest cabin because I meant what I said. I want to be beside you, not in your space, but sharing your life, if you'll have me, if you're ready. With love, Everett. Miriam read the letter 3 times, each reading making her heart beat faster. He was coming back. He was choosing her. And more than that, he was giving her agency, making it her choice too, her decision whether to open the door or keep it closed. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it in her pocket. Then she started preparing. Over the next 2 days, Miriam worked with purpose. She made the cabin spotless, not out of anxiety, but out of anticipation. She cooked a proper meal, her mother's pot roast, the one she'd made with Everett that first time. She even allowed herself to imagine the future. Everett living in the guest cabin he'd designed, the 2 of them working together, building something that honored both their need for independence and their desire for companionship. The morning Everett was due to arrive, Miriam woke before dawn and couldn't stay still. She fed the dogs, who seemed to sense something important was happening. Kodiak stayed close, his tail wagging slowly, patient and knowing. She put on clean clothes, not fancy, she didn't own fancy, but her best flannel shirt, her newer jeans. She brushed her hair and looked at herself in the small mirror, seeing not just a weathered mountain woman, but someone who was choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to risk, choosing to love. Around noon, she heard the sound of an engine laboring up the trail. Her heart kicked into a higher gear. She went to the door, touched her father's carvings one more time for luck, and stepped out onto the porch. Vernon's truck appeared through the trees, and there in the passenger seat was Everett. Even from a distance, Miriam could see him leaning forward, eager, his eyes searching for her. When he spotted her on the porch, his whole face transformed into a smile that made her chest ache with hope. The truck stopped, and Everett climbed out slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind. He stood there in the snow, a man who'd come back from the edge of death and chosen life again. Chosen her. Miriam walked toward him. And when she was close enough to see the hope and fear in his eyes, emotions she recognized because she felt them too, she said the words she'd been practicing. "Welcome home, Everett." His smile widened. "You mean that?" "I mean it. I've been thinking about what you said, about being brave enough to take what I deserve. And I've realized you're right. I've been so focused on protecting myself from hurt that I forgot how to be happy. But these past weeks with you, I remembered. I remembered what it feels like to laugh, to have someone to talk to not be alone. And when you left, the cabin felt empty in a way it never had before. Because it wasn't just my space anymore, it was our space. And I want to keep it that way. If you're still willing." Everett crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "I'm willing. God, Miriam, I'm so willing." She hugged him back, feeling 16 years of loneliness finally lift. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, while Vernon discreetly unloaded Everett's bags and the dogs danced around them both. When they finally pulled apart, Everett kept one arm around her waist. "I brought the money for the taxes. It's in the truck. No arguments. It's a gift freely given. I thought about arguing. Practiced a whole speech about independence and pride." She looked up at him. "But then I realized that accepting help doesn't make me weak. It makes me smart. And turning down money from someone who loves me out of stubborn pride would be the stupid thing to do. Look at you. Being reasonable. Don't get used to it." They went inside together, Everett's arms still around her, and for the first time since he'd left. The cabin felt right again, complete. The dogs settled by the fire, content now that their pack was whole. Vernon joined them for coffee and pot roast, regaling them with town gossip while Miriam and Everett sat close together at the table, their hands intertwined. After Vernon left, Everett pulled out the blueprints for the guest cabin and spread them on the table. He'd refined them in Seattle, adding details and improvements. The cabin would be small but beautiful. A single room with a sleeping loft, a workspace for carving and drawing, large windows to capture natural light. The covered walkway connecting it to the main cabin would have benches and shelves for shared meals when weather was bad. "We can start building in spring," he said, "once the ground thaws. I already talked to a lumber supplier in town. Vernon helped me arrange it. We'll do most of the work ourselves, hire help for the heavy lifting." Miriam studied the plans, seeing not just a building but a statement of intent. He was committing not just to her, but to this life, to the mountain, to the work it would take to build something lasting. "It's perfect," she said. "But Everett, what about your architecture work? You're giving up a lot to be here." "I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing something better." He rolled up the plans. "I can still do consulting work, small residential projects I can manage remotely. But I don't need the prestige or the big commissions anymore. I need this. Us. A life that's simple but real." That night after dinner they sat together on the porch, despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. The wooden wolf still sat on the mantel inside, but now it represented something fulfilled rather than something promised. "I was so scared," Miriam admitted. "When you left, I thought I'd driven you away for good." "You could never drive me away. You might make it harder, but you couldn't make me leave." He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Miriam Hayes, not despite your walls and your independence, but because of them. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'm honored you're letting me in. I love you too." The words felt strange in her mouth after so many years of not saying them to anyone, but they also felt right, true, like something she should have said long ago. "And I'm glad you came back. Glad you chose us. Always," he promised. "From now on, always." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, while inside the cabin the fire burned warm and steady, waiting for them to come home. The week after Everett's return felt like a dream Miriam was afraid to wake from. They fell into rhythms that were both new and familiar, working side by side, sharing meals, talking late into the night. But underneath the contentment ran a current of uncertainty. the question neither of them had fully addressed. What did forever actually look like? Mid-March brought the first real signs of spring. The snow started to melt, revealing brown earth and the promise of green. The days grew noticeably longer. Birds returned, filling the forest with song. And with the thaw came a phone call that would test everything they'd built. Everett's former business partner called on the satellite phone Miriam kept for emergencies. She handed it to him with a questioning look, and he stepped outside to take it. When he came back 20 minutes later, his face was troubled. "They've sweetened the offer," he said. "The library commission. 6 months in Seattle instead of 18. Doubled the compensation. They really want me on this project." Miriam felt her stomach drop. "That's good money." "It is." He sat down heavily at the table. "They're saying I could work remotely for part of it, just be on site for critical phases. 3 months there, the rest here. It would be a compromise." The word hung between them. Compromise, which meant neither of them getting exactly what they wanted, both of them giving up something. "What do you want to do?" Miriam asked carefully. "I don't know." He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "Part of me wants to say no immediately. We have plans, the guest cabin, building a life here. But another part of me remembers what it felt like to create something significant, to know my work would last and matter. Your work here matters, I know, but it's different, smaller, more personal." He looked at her. "Am I being selfish for even considering it?" Miriam recognized the moment for what it was, the test she'd been dreading. She could ask him to stay, could make him choose between his old professional identity and their new life together. Or she could do the harder thing, support whatever decision he needed to make, even if it meant risking everything. She thought about her mother's words, the ones she'd quoted to Everett weeks ago. Some people are meant for loud lives in crowded places, some for quiet lives in wild ones. But what happened when one person was caught between both? "I think you should go," she said quietly. Everett's head snapped up. "What?" "Not forever. But for the 3 months they're asking. Take the commission, do the work. See if it still fits who you are now." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "If you stay here without knowing what you're giving up, you'll always wonder. And that wondering will turn into resentment eventually. Miriam, I'm serious." She stood, needing to move. "These past months have been intense. We went from strangers to, whatever this is, in a compressed timeline. You need to know if you're choosing this life because you want it or because you're running from grief. And I need to know that if you stay, it's because you genuinely choose me, not because you feel obligated. I do choose you. Then prove it. Go to Seattle. Do the work you're trained for. Live in the city again. And if after 3 months you still want to come back here, to this cabin, to me, then I'll believe it. I'll trust it." Everett looked at her with something like pain in his eyes. "You're pushing me away again." "No, I'm setting you free. There's a difference." She came back to the table, took his hands. "I love you, Everett. And because I love you, I can't ask you to give up who you are. If architecture is part of your identity, if creating those big public works matters to you, then you should do it. Maybe we can find a way to make both things work, your career and this life. But we won't know unless you try. What if I go and realize I want to stay there?" The question hurt, but Miriam had been expecting it. "Then you'll have your answer, and I'll have mine. And we'll both be better off knowing the truth. I don't want to lose you. Then come back." She squeezed his hands. 3 months. That's nothing in the grand scheme of things. Take the commission, do brilliant work, and come home to me. If this is real, and I believe it is, it'll survive 3 months apart. That night Miriam couldn't sleep. She'd done the right thing, the brave thing, but it felt awful. She lay in the rocking chair, listening to Everett's breathing from the bed, and wondered if she'd just talked him into leaving her for good. Around 3 in the morning, she heard him get up. A moment later, he was kneeling beside the chair, his hand on her arm. "You're awake." "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm terrified, Miriam. Terrified of going, terrified of staying, terrified of making the wrong choice. That's how you know it matters." "Did you mean what you said? That you think I should go?" She nodded. "I did. Not because I want you to leave, but because I want you to be sure. And because I trust what we have enough to believe it'll survive the test." Everett pulled her out of the chair and into his arms, holding her tight. "I need you to know something. Wherever I am, Seattle, here, anywhere, you're it for me. You're the person I want to come home to. The library project, the prestige, the career, none of it means anything without you to share it with. Then go do the work and come back to me. I will." It was a promise, and they both felt the weight of it. The next morning, Everett started making arrangements. He'd leave in 2 weeks, giving them time to close the distance before separation. They paid the property taxes together. Miriam insisted on being there when the check was written, watching her family's land secured for another year. It felt like a new beginning, even as an ending loomed. Those 2 weeks were bittersweet. They worked together building a small storage shed, something practical and immediate. They took long walks with the dogs, memorizing the feel of each other's presence. They talked about everything: logistics, feelings, fears, hopes. And one evening, sitting by the fire, Everett brought up something Miriam hadn't expected. "When I come back, and I am coming back, I want us to get married." She looked at him, startled. "Married? I know it seems fast. But I'm 58 years old and I've been married before. I know what I want. I want partnership and commitment, and the knowledge that we're building this life together officially, not just as a temporary arrangement." He took off his wedding band, the one he'd worn for years, and set it on the table. "I'll always love Anna, but I'm ready to love you too, fully and without reservation. If you'll have me." Miriam looked at the gold band, understanding the significance of him removing it. It wasn't erasing his past. It was making space for their future. "Ask me again when you get back," she said. "If you still want to after 3 months in Seattle, then I'll have my answer ready. It's going to be yes, isn't it?" She smiled despite the tears in her eyes. "It's going to be yes." The morning he left was clear and cold, spring still struggling to take hold. Vernon came to drive him to the airport in Missoula. Miriam stood on the porch with all 6 dogs, trying to be strong, trying to believe her own words about trust and certainty. Everett held her for a long time, neither of them wanting to let go. Finally he pulled back and cupped her face in his hands. 3 months. I'll call every week, and then I'm coming home. I'll be here." He kissed her, tender and promising, then climbed into Vernon's truck. As it pulled away, he looked back one more time, and Miriam raised her hand in farewell. Then he was gone, and she was alone again. But this time the solitude felt different. Not empty, but waiting. Not permanent, but temporary. The cabin held echoes of his presence. The wooden wolf on the mantel, his carvings scattered around, the blueprints for the guest cabin rolled up on the table. That night, she pulled out her journal and wrote the first entry in what would become a record of waiting. Day 1. He's gone, but not gone. The difference matters. I miss him already, but I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever happens, I chose this. I chose to risk my heart, to believe in something bigger than my fear. And that feels like the bravest thing I've ever done. The first week without Everett was strange. Miriam fell back into her old routines, but they felt different now, incomplete. She'd gotten used to having someone to share coffee with in the mornings, someone to talk to about the small observations that made up a day on the mountain. The dogs noticed too, especially Kodiak, who spent the first few days searching the cabin for the man who'd become part of their pack. True to his word, Everett called at the end of the first week. His voice over the satellite phone sounded both familiar and distant. "How's Seattle?" Miriam asked, trying to sound casual. "Overwhelming. I'd forgotten how loud cities are, how many people there are everywhere you go." He paused. "I miss the quiet. I miss you. How's the project?" "Impressive. The library's going to be beautiful, all glass and natural light, designed to feel open and welcoming. My partner's done good preliminary work." He paused. "But Miriam, being here just confirms what I already knew. This isn't home anymore. You are." She wanted to believe him. "It's only been a week, I know. I'm not rushing anything. Just telling you where my head's at." They talked for another 20 minutes about small things. The weather, the dogs, progress on the project. When they hung up, Miriam felt both better and worse. Better because she'd heard his voice. Worse because 3 months suddenly felt impossibly long. The second week brought warmer weather and the real beginning of spring. Snow melted rapidly, revealing brown earth beneath. Miriam worked on preparing her garden plot, turning soil that had been frozen for months. It was hard physical work, and she welcomed it, anything to keep her hands and mind occupied. Vernon visited midweek with supplies and news. "That man of yours called me," he said. "Asked me to check on you, make sure you're doing all right." "I'm fine. Missing someone isn't the same as not being fine." "It's okay to admit it's hard." "It's hard," Miriam admitted. "But it's the right kind of hard. Not the hard of being alone forever, but the hard of waiting for something good." Vernon smiled. "Your mother would have liked him. Your father, too. They always wanted you to find someone who could match you, not change you." Week 3 brought Everett's second call. He sounded tired but energized. "The design phase is going faster than expected. I might be able to come home sooner, maybe 2.5 months instead of 3. Home." Miriam caught the word. "Yes, home. The cabin. You." He told her about visiting Anna's grave, about having a conversation with her memory. "I told her about you, about finding a reason to live again. I think she'd be happy for me. For us, I'm sure she would be. I also told her goodbye. Not goodbye to the memory of her, but goodbye to the grief that's been running my life. I'll always love her, but I'm ready to move forward now." That conversation sustained Miriam through the harder days. Spring came fully, bringing endless work. She planted her garden, thinking about 2 people instead of 1. In the evening, she worked on learning to carve, using her father's tools and the techniques she'd watched Everett use. Simple shapes at first, a spoon, a bowl. It was her way of preparing for his return. Week 6 brought Everett's third call, his voice holding barely contained excitement. "The design phase is done, approved by the city council. They want me to stay on for construction oversight, but I told them I could do it remotely with monthly site visits. They agreed, so you're coming home." 2 more weeks. "I need to wrap up details, pack my things, say proper goodbyes. But yes, I'm coming home for good. Not as a guest, not as someone healing, but as someone who's chosen this life." The final 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Miriam cleaned the cabin, made repairs, started gathering materials for the guest cabin they'd build together. She even bought a new dress, simple blue cotton that made her feel foolish and hopeful at the same time. The night before his return, she barely slept. Morning came clear and bright. She fed the dogs, made coffee, and stood on the porch watching the trail. Around noon, she heard Vernon's truck. The dogs erupted into joyful barking. Kodiak's tail wagging so hard, his whole body shook. The truck appeared through the trees. Everett was leaning forward, searching for her. When he spotted her on the porch with the dogs, his face transformed into the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen. He climbed out and strode straight to her, dropping his bag. Pulling her into his arms, "I'm home," he said. "I'm finally home." Miriam held him tight. 3 months of waiting finally paying off. "Welcome home." He pulled back and reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "I can't wait another minute." "Miriam Hayes, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life building things with you, living on this mountain, being part of your world?" "Yes, absolutely yes." He opened the box, 2 simple gold bands, perfect for the life they'd chosen. He slipped one onto her finger. She slipped the other onto his. Not replacing what he'd had before, but creating something new. Something theirs. Vernon cleared his throat. "I'll just unload these bags." "Congratulations, you two," after he left. They stood together on the porch, both wearing new rings, looking at the mountain that had brought them together. "I visited the library site every day," Everett said. "Beautiful building, important work. But every night I'd go back to my hotel, and all I could think about was here. The quiet mornings, the work we do together, the life we're building. That's when I knew this isn't running away from something. This is running toward everything that matters." "Show me," Miriam said. "Show you what?" "Show me that you're here to stay." Everett smiled and took her hand. I've got blueprints to review, a guest cabin to build, a wedding to plan, and the rest of my life to spend with you. How's that for proof? That'll do, she said, and kissed him while the dogs danced around them and the mountain watched with ancient patience, holding space for two people who'd finally found their way home. Spring turned to summer in the way it does in the mountains, gradually and then all at once. The snow melted completely, revealing a landscape eager to bloom. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in waves of color. The creek ran high and fast with snowmelt. And on the property where Miriam Hayes had lived alone for 16 years, two people worked side by side, building something new. The guest cabin took shape slowly, deliberately. Everett and Miriam worked together every day, their hands learning the rhythm of shared labor. He brought his architect's precision to the work, measuring twice and cutting once. She brought her mountain knowledge, understanding how buildings needed to sit in this landscape to withstand the weather. Together, they created something that was more than the sum of their individual skills. Vernon came up regularly with supplies, always finding an excuse to stay for coffee and watch their progress. He brought news from town too, how the story of the mountain woman and the stranger she'd saved from wolves had become local legend, how people were rooting for them, how the general store kept a betting pool on when the wedding would happen. "Tell them, June," Miriam said one afternoon. "Surprising both Vernon and Everett, June." Everett looked up from the board he was planning. "As in next month? As in 4 weeks from now? Small ceremony. Just a few people right here on the property. I'm 52 years old and you're 58. We don't need a long engagement. We know what we want." Everett's face split into a grin. "June it is." The wedding happened on a Saturday in mid-June, with the guest cabin finished enough to serve as backdrop, even if the interior work remained. Vernon officiated. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. His wife came, along with a handful of people from Pine Ridge who'd known Miriam's parents. The dogs were in attendance too, groomed within an inch of their lives and wearing bandanas Everett had sewn himself. Miriam wore the blue dress she'd bought, simple and honest, like everything else in her life. Everett wore a suit he'd brought from Seattle, but already looked uncomfortable in. Within an hour of the ceremony, he'd be back in flannel and jeans. They wrote their own vows. Miriam went first, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. "Everett, you came into my life when I'd convinced myself I didn't need anyone. You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being alone, that accepting help isn't weakness, and that love is worth the risk of loss. I promised to build this life with you, not to change you or be changed, but to grow alongside you, to face the hard winters and celebrate the brief summers, to be your partner in every sense of the word. To choose you every day, for as long as we both shall live." Everett's vows came next, his voice rough with feeling. "Miriam, you saved my life in more ways than pulling me from the snow. You showed me that it's possible to start over, to find purpose again, to love again even after devastating loss. I promise to honor your independence while offering my support, to respect your strength while being there when you need me, to build beside you, not over you, to make this mountain our home and our partnership the foundation everything else rests on. You are my choice, my love, my home, always." Vernon pronounced them married, and they kissed while their small congregation applauded and the dogs howled in celebration. It was simple and perfect, and exactly right for who they were. The summer that followed was one of the happiest of Miriam's life. She and Everett fell into patterns that honored both their need for togetherness and their individual identities. They worked together in the mornings, finishing the guest cabin's interior, tending the garden, maintaining the property. Afternoons were for separate pursuits. Everett would retreat to his workshop to carve or work on remote architecture consultations, while Miriam checked trap lines or worked with the dogs. Evenings were shared again, cooking dinner together, talking about their days, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set behind the peaks. Once a month, Everett traveled to Seattle for 2 or 3 days to oversee the library construction. Miriam went with him twice, experiencing the city through his eyes, meeting his former colleagues, seeing the building that represented his other life. She was proud of his work, but relieved each time to return to the mountain. "You could live there if you wanted," he said after one trip. "I'd understand." She shook her head. "I could visit, but I can't live there. This is home, I know. It's home for me too now." By fall, the guest cabin was complete. Everett moved his things into it, his drawing table, his carving tools, his clothes and books. But most nights, he still slept in the main cabin with Miriam, the two structures connected by the covered walkway that allowed them to move between independence and togetherness as needed. They hosted their first real guest that October, Everett's former business partner and his wife, who drove up from Seattle, curious to see the life Everett had chosen. The visit went well, the couple charmed by the mountain and the obvious happiness Everett and Miriam had found. "You were right to leave," the partner said before departing. "This suits you in a way the city never did. You seem at peace." "I am," Everett confirmed, "more than I've been in years." Winter came again, as it always does in the mountains. The first heavy snow arrived in November, transforming the landscape back into the white wilderness where their story had begun. Miriam and Everett sat on the porch on the anniversary of the day she'd found him, 1 year exactly since. She'd followed blood trails through the forest and saved a stranger's life. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd gone a different direction that morning?" Everett asked. "If you'd checked a different part of your property, if the dogs had pulled the sled another way?" "Sometimes, but I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not that day, maybe not that way. But eventually. You believe in fate? I believe in choice. You chose to come to these mountains. I chose to save you. We both chose to take the risk of loving again. That's not fate. That's us being brave enough to reach for what we needed. Then I'm grateful for all our choices." He took her hand, their wedding rings catching the last light. "Even the scary ones, especially the scary ones." As full dark fell and the temperature dropped, they went inside to the warmth of the cabin. The fire burned bright, the dogs were settled in their spots, and dinner was simmering on the stove. Everything was as it should be, simple, honest, real. Miriam stood at the window looking out at the forest where she'd found Everett a year ago. She thought about the woman she'd been then, capable and strong, but deeply alone, convinced that solitude was the only safe way to live. And she thought about who she was now, still capable, still strong, but no longer alone. Still herself, but expanded by love and partnership into something richer. "You know what's strange?" she said as Everett came to stand beside her. "A year ago, when I found you in the snow, I thought I was saving you. I thought that was the story. Woman rescues man, nurses him back to health, sends him on his way. What do you think now?" She turned to face him, this man who'd stumbled into her life half frozen and transformed it completely. "I think we saved each other. You were dying in the snow. I was dying in my solitude. We both needed rescuing. We just didn't know it." Everett pulled her close, and they stood together in the cabin that had absorbed them both, that had become their shared home. "So what's the story now? Miriam smiled against his shoulder. "Now it's just beginning. Two people who thought their lives were over finding out they were only halfway through. Two people choosing each other and this place and the work of building something that lasts. That's the story. That's our story. I like that story. So do I." Outside, snow began to fall again. Light flurries that would deepen as the night went on, laying down fresh powder for morning. The mountains settled into winter with the patience of something ancient and eternal. And inside the cabin, two people who'd found each other against all odds sat down to dinner, their dogs at their feet, their future stretching ahead like the endless peaks beyond the window, challenging and beautiful and worth every risk they'd taken to claim it. The wooden wolf still sat on the mantel, now joined by other carvings, a bear, a raven, a pair of intertwined trees, each one a marker of time past, of skills shared, of a life built piece by piece through care and attention and love. This was home. Not just a structure of wood and stone, but a feeling, a choice, a commitment renewed every day. And for two people who'd spent too long wandering in their own wildernesses, home was everything.